My name is Karsten Januszewski. I'm a developer with Microsoft, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about a project I've been working on called Oomph, about microformats. Before I jump into microformats, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the team I'm on and what we're up to. We're slightly different. We're not a product team. What we are is basically 6 guys standing behind some Microsoft building, chucking garbage. I'm not really sure what's going on there. But what we're up to is actually writing more than just demos, looking at technologies, taking Microsoft technologies, and then looking at what's going on out in the web space and building actual prototypes that we put some time and investment into, and then we take whatever we built and we put it out on Codeplex for the community to pick up and take either our binaries that we write or actually take our source code, jump in and contribute to the source code, etc. And we're all coming out of, are associated with the Mix conference. So Mix conference is another conference Microsoft puts on, similar to PDC, although more tightly focused on just more consumer web scenarios. So we're associated with that conference, but what we're going to be doing is continuing to roll these projects out every couple months. So keep an eye on Mix Online at the Visit Mix URL to see what we're up to. And a few of my other team members are here. Tim Adlin is back here somewhere. He's the designer and did all the design, there he is, all the design work on Oomph, and as well as the design work on the Visit Mix site. And Thomas Lewis is also here. He's leads the team. So without further ado, let's jump into the first project that we just shipped. It's up on visitmix.com right now and up on Codeplex. And it's about microformats. Microformats are pretty cool. I didn't know much about them until we started this project. But the more I've learned about them, the more I've kind of gotten hooked into microformats. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time in case you don't know what they are. And they'll become very obvious what they are once I do some demos. In a nutshell, microformats are about taking data and representing it in HTML in some kind of way that both humans and machines can understand so that you can do something with that HTML. You'll see what I mean in a moment. The microformats work isn't owned by a specific standards body. It comes out of kind of a loose collective of really smart folks that come up with specs. They have a wiki. In fact, all their specs are on a wiki. A lot of really smart people in the industry that are interested in the semantic web, interested in open data, and other types of projects. So they came up with this idea, and it's really gained traction. You can see here some of the stats I have. Over 1 billion of their most popular formats, the H-card format, which is all about contacts. 1 billion of these in the wild, adopted by Yahoo, YouTube, Facebook, lots and lots of big-named websites, as well as thousands of other websites out on the internet. So, microformats are not are definitely on the rise, if you will, and that's why we got interested in them. And so, what Oomph is Microsoft, and in particular our little team. It's really all the code was written by me, Joshua Allen, and Tim, trying to put together a toolkit for microformats. Across 3 different vectors, which we'll see here in a moment. Making it easier to consume microformats, do something with them, making it easier to style them if you want to use them, and then making it easier to create them. So that's the sort of the triple trifecta of what we did with Oomph. And without further ado, let's take a look at what these things are. So here I'm in Tool, my favorite HTML editing tool. I don't know if you guys use Expression Web or not. I hadn't used it that much until this project, and I pretty much lived in it throughout this project for all my JavaScript development, and all my HTML development, CSS development. It's a great tool. So I've just got a very, very simple HTML page here. And right now you're seeing the actual HTML. We'll look at it in a browser here real quick. This is just a page, and it's actually up on my blog. This is a local copy of it here. It gives my contact info and some events I'm attending. Very common information that we have all over the web, right? Common data, types of data that we deal with. Well, the question becomes, we all know that this is my contact info. We can figure this out semantically. We kind of can tell that this is an address, and we sort of know this is an event. But the question is, how could you make something in the HTML so that you always knew that that was a contact and that was an event? How do you do that? Well, search engines do it by making a lot of inference. And you've got really smart people who write very complicated algorithms at the big search engine companies to figure this out. But that's not ultimately the best solution. Now, another group of people came up with the solution. These are the semantic web people. I don't know how familiar you are with the semantic web. But they said, well, couldn't we just stick some information in here into the HTML that said, all right, now I can say, if I know I see this information, it'll work. And it looks something like this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with RDF and some of this work. But their sort of vision for the world was, what if I just added this XML namespace so that parsers and indexers could look for this namespace, and then they could look for some schema called description and know that this is where my URL is, and they could look for this. And there's a lot of time and investment that's gone into this idea, but it's never really taken off. And one of the reasons why is it means I have to add more content to my page than's already there. I'm duplicating information that's already there. And if you're a designer or whatnot, this is just ugly. It's cumbersome. It's not intuitive. And so microformats are about trying to solve this problem, but in a really simple and elegant way. And so here's how Microformats proposes to do it. Let's get rid of this ugliness. And it says, all right, we already know that we have this information here, this contact information. So if we can just use the existing class tag in the HTML spec, which is used for styling, right? And we'll all agree that if I have some class tag in my HTML, everything inside this div is now representing a contact. Or similarly, if I say this class, everything inside this href is a URL. And because you can put multiple items in a class tag, it's also the distinguished name as well. And that's all microformats are. Very simple, very elegant. Taking the existing CSS styles, making some common agreements, a schema, if you will, which you can find up at microformats.org, and then just adding those class tags to the data that's already on the page. So with that in mind, rather than coding it all, here's that exact same page, but encoded, if you will, with microformats. And you can see some of the other names here for address, country, down here for events. You get start time, end time, location, et cetera, et cetera. And now if we open this, it looks the exact same, but it's now been encoded in such a way that some more interesting things can happen to it. So what, you might say, for example? Well, one thing is now search engines can index this content knowing that there's contact information there. And actually, Yahoo's really pioneered this with the product they have called SearchMonkey that's out now. And what it allows you to do is kind of pass certain namespaces. And Microformats aren't the only one, but in this case, that's the one I'm interested in. So what I've done here is I've run a query for any page on the internet that has an HCard that also has, in this case, it's an ego search I'm doing here, my name in it. And you can see I get to LinkedIn profile. I get to, in fact, I get down here. Here's actually that same page that we were just looking at that's from my blog that it found in the search engine. So that's kind of interesting. There's another angle, though, that I think is equally interesting. And that is, once you have this data marked up on the web as content, what can the browser do with that information? And really, the first people to pioneer this work was a guy named Michael Capley from IBM, who wrote an extension for Firefox that did just that. And I actually have it installed here. So this is a Firefox add-in. And what it's done is, after that page was rendered and parsed by Firefox, it then looked for that vcard class tag and said, oh, look at that. There's a contact on this page. oh, it's Karsten Januszewski. And now what can I do with that? Well, I can get that out of the browser and push it to places. I can export it maybe to my local desktop, to my mail program, or I could push it to some service in the cloud like Yahoo Contacts. And really, this is where we wanted to do something as well. So we looked at this and said, all right, well, what else can we do here? How can we solve this problem? So what Oomph is about is something very similar, but slightly different. So what we said was, why don't we add a JavaScript file that does something very similar and adds a bunch of functionality on the page? So I'm just going to do some cut and paste here real quick. I'm going to grab 2 scripts. I'm going to go back to that page here that we were looking at with microformats and put them in. And this is what really Oomph is offering to you. Now, the 2 scripts are first a reference to the jQuery library. We used the jQuery library to build the Oomph experience. And then we have a reference to the actual Oomph script itself that's up on our Visit Mix site. And once I do that, let's open this page up. And I heard about this new browser that all the cool kids are into. So we'll see what it looks like in that. So the page renders, but after the page is rendered, it's going to hit that JavaScript file, and it's going to provide this Oomph experience. So what this Gleam is saying is, hey, there's microformats on this page, and what can we do with them? And in this case, we're aggregating all the events and then all the contact information. And we're doing, similarly, making it able for you to get that data out of the web page and maybe on your desktop or maybe into the cloud. So I'm feeling a little dirty showing this browser, so maybe I'll export to Outlook, and that'll make everything OK. And so there, it's pulling that event information out of the browser and then generating an Outlook calendar event for me that I can just save, et cetera. Same with, I could take that information and maybe export to Windows Live or whatever cloud service. So again, what makes microformats interesting here and what we're trying to offer is a way to get that data out of the web page and do something interesting with it. And there you go. It allows me to save that event to my Windows Live calendar. Now, this is all well and good, but you'll notice I had to explicitly add this script to my web page to get the Oomph experience, which is fine, but it would be nice that if any time you went to a page with microformats, you would get that Oomph experience. And so that's what we did with I think, the most interesting part of Oomph. We wrote a C++ Internet Explorer add-in that, if you install it, actually injects that JavaScript file into Pages and gives that Gleam experience on any page in Internet Explorer that has microformats. So let's take a look at that. In this case, I'm going to go to a Yahoo property that actually called upcoming.yahoo.com. It has lots of content formatted with microformats. And you see the page comes up. And in a second here, once it gets done parsing, it'll discover that there are microformats on the page. And hello. OK. And finds this WinHack event, similar experience, finds contact information. So in this case, Yahoo doesn't have that Oomph JavaScript referenced on their page. But because we have this add-in installed, it injects that JavaScript. And another thing I didn't show, we've added virtual Earth as well. So we'll take any information we pull from contact info or event info, geocode that on the fly, and then map it with virtual Earth. So actually, here we are at the Figueroa. Can even do things like the bird's eye view, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, ooh. So in a nutshell, that's what Oomph is, and that's what we built. at least the consume experience. Now, we also wanted to make it easier for people to create these microformats if they're going to use them on the site, and make it easier for them to style these microformats. So if you remember, all of these microformats are simply class tags on your HTML. Well, if you know about how CSS works, if you can just write a style that styles these well-known class tags, and all of a sudden you have a set of styles that work for any content formatted with microformats. So we have a page here. I'll just show you a quick demo of microformat styles we've built. So if you go ahead and use microformats on your page, you could use any one of these styles and just plug it right in and have your microformats get formatted thusly. The last thing we did was to make microformats easier to consume, and we did that through Windows Live Writer. So Windows Live Writer is a great tool if you're blogging, and it targets any blog engine: WordPress, movable type, Spaces, your own custom blogs, etc. So we decided, well, let's make a plugin for Windows Live Writer so that if you want to write a blog post and then add some contact information, if we go ahead and look at what that looks at formatting-wise, it's doing all that work for you and adding those class tags, just making it easier for you to get your content formatted as microformats. All righty. So that is what we built, and now I want to talk about how we built it and some of the things we learned. So I'm going to first talk about the consume piece, and again, that's probably the most ambitious part of Oomph. And we'll look at both the Internet Explorer add-in and how we built that jQuery overlay. So our design goals were to create something unique for Internet Explorer. So we did that by building this add-in that injects the script. We also wanted to not be Internet Explorer specific. So that's why we provide the script. And if you put it on your web page, it works in any browser, on any platform. We didn't want to have any server dependencies. So there are none. We don't use any back-end functionality on that script whatsoever. It's pure client-side. All the HTML gets rendered on the client, created on the client, etc. And we wanted it to be extensible. And you'll see in a second that you can take what we did and add other kinds of microformats. So there's really two, I'll do all questions at the end. There's really two plays here, if you will. It gets a little confusing. So if you're a user and you install our Internet Explorer add-in and you're using IE, any site with microformats is going to light up with our little Oomph experience. Now, if you're a developer, you can take our Oomph experience and add it directly to your web page, and then your page will light up no matter who comes to your website, whether they have the Internet Explorer installed or not, add-in installed, whether they're even on Internet Explorer. So just to try and tease that out, that's the difference between the two. There's sort of a user play and a developer play here. Now, the developer, as far as the add-in goes, there's some interesting pieces to this architecture. And so it's kind of a cool piece of code. So a few things just on the nitty-gritty of this guy. We don't inject the script if it's an SSL page. That seems kind of invasive. So, and we pull our script before we inject it over SSL so that nobody could tamper with the script or we don't have any risk of DNS poisoning. It's UI-less, it's headless. So all of the UI is in JavaScript, just because we didn't want to deal with the C++ UI layer. All the C++ code does is injects the JavaScript after the page hits the browser. And we had a few gotchas here in dealing with how we listened for the events and whether someone refreshed or opened a tag. But the most interesting thing is that this is all up on Codeplex. And I wanted to show you this right now. I don't know if how much you've seen of this, but I wanted to show you a little of the code and just show you how easy it is to work on a Codeplex project if you've got Visual Studio and Visual Studio Team Foundation system on your machine. So like I said, we published this up to Codeplex. In fact, we can look at it here. And even from the Codeplex site, you can go ahead and browse the source files right from Codeplex. You can download the source. But if you really want a good experience, here you go. So, I can come into the source code. Net is running very slowly today. And browse it, etc. But if you really want a great experience and you perhaps join us on the project, you don't have to do that. You can just log into the project right from Visual Studio and just be directly looking at all the source right from there. Boy. But we're not going to do that. Well, all right. We'll persevere. So you can, there we go. And so I'd already logged in. So I guess my point being, I don't think I realized how easy it was to get involved in a Codeplex project until I started working on this project. And so if you're interested in participating in Codeplex, it's as easy as just connecting right from Visual Studio. And here I can, I'm now in the source code tree up on Codeplex. I can open projects. I can check out files. I can create new work items and really participate in the community. So here's that code I was talking about. There's not a lot of code here. The essence, we set up, we listen, provide a query interface into the web browser so we get a hold of it. Then we listen for 2 events, either the onDocumentComplete or onReadyStateChange. And then we inject script tags, and we inject the script. And we don't do it if the tag already exists. So it's really tight code, but it's pretty darn powerful, the ability to inject JavaScript into pages after they come to the client. The part I want to switch to now is the part that I spent the most time on, and I think had a lot of learning, was the jQuery piece, which is the whole UI for Oomph. And I hadn't worked with JavaScript for years until I started this project. I was a WPF, Silverlight, managed code, strict typing, like JavaScript scary, I don't want to touch this thing kind of guy. And jQuery changed my tune dramatically, namely because it handles all these just annoying browser differences that make programming in JavaScript so painful. But also, it just allows you to do stuff so quickly and so easily that it really was fun. And it also, I don't know if any of you went to the languages panel today with Anders and all those guys. It was also fun to just use a different programming language. And it was good for my brain to handle a dynamic, untyped language instead of what I was used to. And they were talking about that in the language panel today, that it's really healthy to go use a different programming language than the one that is your daily bread and butter. If you can find the time or the project to do it or just make it happen, I completely agree with those guys. It's kind of like speaking another language. It just makes your brain work in different ways. And if you choose JavaScript to take on this project, use jQuery as my recommendation. It's just, and Microsoft's really embraced it now. It now has IntelliSense right inside Visual Studio. It's really, they have hooks right into ASP.NET. There's actually a whole session on it earlier at PDC that's worth checking out. So, huge fan of jQuery, and here's the main reasons why. I'm not the first person to say this. Lots of people who know Link are saying it feels kind of like Link when you're doing DOM queries with jQuery. They have all this really cool syntax, really cool chaining. You'll see in a second, it makes querying over the DOM fun. And it's not using XPath either, because not all browsers support XPath. But they, again, abstract away all the details, provide this query language for you, and makes life fun. Same with HTML generation. Very similar to me as a WPF and Silverlight developer as building a tree of elements. It's the same way it works in jQuery. And you can, that whole Oomph experience, we generate entirely on the fly, in code, on the client. None of that's generated on the server at all in jQuery, and it's fast. Same with the animation engine. If you remember, the jQuery sort of flies out. If you remember when I toggle between items, they sort of fade in and out. That's using their animation engine. Really easy to code and can make your sites look pretty nice, pretty easily. And they also do some nice things with script loading, which can get really hairy in JavaScript when you get into race conditions and whatnot in different browsers. So all of those made me a huge fan. The other thing that made it all bearable was Internet Explorer 8 developer tools that I also want to demo and show you guys. I was a Firebug user before this. I don't know if you guys know about Firebug. Firebug was JavaScript debugger and whatnot. And it was good, but remember, I'm dealing only in Internet Explorer when I'm dealing with the Oomph add-in, so I couldn't use it. But simultaneously as we were working on this project, Internet Explorer 8 comes out, as good, if not better, than Firebug. It's really, really nice. And it makes doing JavaScript development fun. And like all the things that you hated doing before, setting message boxes to get debug information and whatnot, is now over. So let's take a look at this. So let's just go right back to this page. So here is that upcoming.yahoo.com page that has microformats. So here, if I go to Tools, I can go into the Developer Tools. And now I'm getting a tree view. And here's what's interesting to me that I don't think I really realized until I started this project, which is that what happens to the HTML after it hits the browser is not the same thing that came from the server. So if you do a view source on this guy right now, you aren't going to see any of this oomph in the source. Because when you do a view source, you're seeing what the server generated and when it sent that off the server to when it hit the client, to when it hit the browser. But once it hits the browser, all kinds of funky things happen to it afterward, depending on what various scripts do, whether it's the Oomph script or who knows whose script. And that's the first thing that's so essential about these developer tools, is here I'm now getting the actual what the tree looks like at this moment, depending on what the user's done. So you can see down here, these 4 lines is where our scripts have gotten inserted. The visitmix.com, oomph.js, the jQuery, and then even our script, after it gets injected, continues to manipulate the DOM. And we add our own CSS. I go and pull the virtual earth script and inject that into the code. So it's just fascinating what can happen to an HTML page after it gets loaded. There's also quite a lot of nice CSS features in, and then the other thing I wanted to call out, if we go into the body, if we go way down here, here is the actual Oomph span. Actually, a better way to do this, I can come to, actually, let me open it up. I can come into here and grab the pointer and say, where in the tree is this element? So we can grab that. And now it's going to bounce me in the tree to that element real time. And if something happens to that, it's keeping track of everything real time. Yeah, it's totally useful. The CSS tab, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but it's pulling every CSS file, no matter where it came from or where it's referencing, local, so I can just browse the different CSS files being used by this. And here's our CSS file. And you can even turn things on and off and see what happens to the layout when you turn on a piece of CSS. But as a dev, the part that is just essential is the script. And this is also kind of a revelation to me. I'm now pulling locally every script that has been loaded by this web page, and I can now look at that script and debug into it at will. So in this case, I'm going right to my script, Oomph, but it really makes, people talk about how, the open web and how JavaScript really is this open format. And with debugging tools like this, you can see how it works. I can debug into anybody's JavaScript locally. So for example, let's do that on Oomph. So I'm going to bounce down here. It's not a huge file. It's about 1,000 lines. But I'm going to go into this method here called find and parse hcards. So this is where if there's actually hcards on the page, I'm going to try and find them, and then I'm going to put them in some variables so that I can do stuff with them, like export them to various services. So I'll go ahead and add a breakpoint there. I'm going to say start debugging. And it always does that. I still haven't figured out why it gets confused and thinks something else is there. All right. Let me refresh again. So this time, it should hit my script once, well, it's still waiting for Oomph to load. There we go. All right, so Oomph loaded. It got hit. So now it hits my breakpoint. And you can see over here in my locals window, local to this function are all these various variables I've defined. And so I can start stepping through this code. And you can watch as it parses the H card. And I look using that query syntax I was talking about. So this is that jQuery query syntax. It's saying find me all fn's, find me all n's. You can watch, the locals fill up with data. So it's very similar to what you might get in a Visual Studio. Similarly, I can go add watches. I can see the call stack. I can see that I'm in an anonymous function right now in jQuery, and I can double-click to get to the root of where that came, or even other functions in the JavaScript, or even other functions in other people's code. So it keeps track of the entire call stack across different script files as it bounces around. And then I can get back to where I was. I've got a console window where I can just quickly see what variables are, or even see properties on those variables. And then, of course, I can set breakpoints. So without tools like this, I think JavaScript programming can be tough. But with tools like this, it starts to get kind of reasonable to do this sort of development. So I'm going to go ahead and play through that, and then also show one other feature in the tool, which is the profiler. So there's also a profiler. I can say, start profiling, and now come back to this page, maybe do something. Let's just run the animation and close it. And then stop profiling. And I can then see in my methods, where's my Oomph methods? Here's all the various methods coming off of either jQuery itself, which is doing the animation, or my code itself, hiding some CSS value or showing some CS value. I can see the inclusive time, the exclusive time, how long are these things taking. I can profile my JavaScript app. So thumbs up to Internet Explorer developer tools. Love it. Yeah. Just a few other things I'm going to go into this view just because I think it's easier to see. On some of the things I learned doing jQuery, I'm not going to get into a ton of this, but we did run into some interesting namespacing issues. Because JavaScript doesn't have namespaces, or it has really loose namespaces, we had to be real careful about not trumping on other people's namespaces, both with jQuery itself and with our own code. So that's what all this code is up here, is to look for whether we've already been loaded or whether jQuery's already been loaded, and just make sure we don't tromp on their toes. Here's again some of that syntax that's sort of link-like. This is the only call I have to make to find all the vCards on a page. Just say, hey, find me all the vCards. Here, find all the vEvents. And that's going to create a JavaScript collection object that, as you saw, I can iterate over. And now here's a lot of this code for just generating all that HTML. Like I said, all that HTML is dynamically generated on the client with jQuery. And it's basically just a lot of making a bunch of divs, and then later on, I compose all those divs together and build a tree. It wasn't that hard. Here's some of the stuff I was talking about where jQuery makes getting other scripts and getting them into your page really easy. They just provide a command, get script. So in this is the case, I'm getting the virtual Earth script. And jQuery handles for me, different browser differences of injecting that script into the head tag, making sure it gets injected, and the page doesn't load until it's injected, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other thing I wanted to show was this paging that I was sort of proud of. So if you remember, where was that file? I will go open it here. Doesn't matter. We'll open it in IE. Because I was running it local, it got mad about ActiveX. There we go. So if you remember this here, what I've done here is each of these different events is actually just an LI tag in the HTML tree. And only the first one is set to visible. And then what I do is I create this sort of paging model where as you go between these buttons, I collapse and hide the one that you're moving away from, and I display the other one. So all that, again, using to get that little roll effect is just using jQuery, and it's basically .show right here, and then give it an animation seed to show it, or wherever I hide them. Can't remember where. Somewhere I hide them. Yeah, here, .hide. And you can, this is the simplest animation you can do, but you can animate any CSS property using jQuery with very similar syntax. So in a nutshell, thumbs up for jQuery, thumbs up for IE developer tools. A few additional details of things we did. So we did push to all these cloud services, which turned out to be pretty easy. They all supported query string interfaces, and I just had to figure out what the query string interface was, grab that data out of the microformat, and push it to the cloud. As far as bringing it to the desktop, what we did is built an actual ASP.NET page. I pass all the values up to the ASP.NET page, and it generates these things called vcards or icals, and those are known industry standards hosted by ECMA, I think, that both Outlook know how to read, and Apple's iCal and their contact information knows how to read. And then I did some stuff with Virtual Earth, with geocoding, which is really cool. Virtual Earth does support geocoding now. I'm not going to spend too much time there, but there was a great talk on Virtual Earth already at the PDC. All right, moving on to the other two aspects of Oomph was the styling and the creating. So on this front, again, we have something for users, and then we have something for designers. So for users, we've made something, and there's actually a bunch of plugins for Windows Live Writer that allows you to add microformatted content to your blog posts. So we'll see that in a second. And then for designers, we've generated all these CSS files, so if you want to make your site look pretty, you can do so. So let's get in a little bit more to Windows Live Writer. Again, I'm a huge fan of this software. I don't know if you guys are using it or not, but it's great. Allows you to create your blog posts offline, does really nice formatting, targets almost every blogging platform. I just can't say more about it. And what I learned was that writing plugins for this thing is so easy and so elegant, so that if your company is really starting to use blogs as sort of the way they publish content, which I think is becoming increasingly frequent, I would encourage you to look at Windows Live Writer and look at their plugin model, which is, again, really, really easy. It's as simple as you add a DLL, their DLL, you decorate your method with a couple attributes, you override a method, and you rock on. So, and then as far as styling, I don't have too much to say here other than my experience with CSS is that it's a programming language. And anybody that says any different's wrong. Like, CSS is kind of gnarly, and you can do some incredibly powerful things with it if you're good at it. So that was my revelation on this project. So let's look at writing, just real quick, how to write a Windows Live Writer plugin. Again, I'm going to just go straight to our source tree. And if you join the Oomph project, you can be looking at the exact same thing I'm doing here. So here's our plugin. Their whole model is WinForms. So they don't support WPF. They only support WinForms in Windows Live Writer. And the key code is right here, this plugin.cs code, where you just decorate your class. You inherit from their content source class, add some attributes, and then override this create content method, which takes an out parameter of a string. So whatever string you want to insert into Windows Live Writer, you just generate that string and then pass it back to Windows Live Writer, and boom, off you go. You compile it down to a DLL, and there you go. So that is one kind of little gotcha that I realized is because the plugins are DLLs, well, how do you debug them? So in that case, you actually have to attach to Windows Live Writer to be able to debug into your project. So I'll show you that here real quick. So in this case, I've already got Windows Live Writer open, and this is my plugin. So we'll go ahead and say attach to process and find Windows Live Writer. And now, if I go to Windows Live Writer and I grab this, I'm going to hit my breakpoint, and now I can start debugging my content. So just one little tip if you're going to be doing Windows Live Writer development. But again, this is all the code you need. Everything out of this is your own custom code to do whatever. Similarly, there's some other great Microformats plugins for Windows Live Writer. They've got an insert event one that allows you to go and find events using the Eventful Web Service. They've got a Geo one. They've got a bunch of them. So that is that. All right, moving on. The final thing I want to talk about is extensibility. So everything that we do on our team, we want to be extensible so that people can take it, do more with it, add their own things, and really run with what we've built. So we built Oomph to be extensible. The only ones that we really tackled are these two biggie daddies, the H-card format and the H-calendar format. But there's other microformats, some which are have more traction than others, and I really think that microformats are going to take off, and I think we'll see more and more of these coming around. So we did want to provide a sample of what it looks like to extend Oomph, and I wanted to show you that right now. What we did it was with the something called the H audio format. So give me just a second here to pull it up. All right, there we go. Okay. So hold on here. Oh, did I grab the wrong one? Actually, let me grab it out of our source tree. So we have this running up here. Yeah, okay, so it's in test X. So let me just open this in Visual Studio real quick. So in this case, this one doesn't reference oomph.js, but oomphx.js. And it's got the same contact info, the same event stuff. But then I added the H audio microformat. So this is one for recognizing audio files on a site and being able to do something with them. So here you can see I've got this class H audio, and I can look at things like who wrote this track and what's the type of track. It's got where is the track, where can I download it, etc. So we'll see what this looks like. Oh, I don't want to run you from localhost. Hold on here. I want to run you from the file system. And I don't know. I'm having an issue with this one. We're just going to move on. But it works, trust me. So where are we? And yeah. So that's pretty much it. We've built this thing. We've got it all open sourced up on CodePlex. We're looking for contributors. You can either just go to CodePlex and install the binaries, which will install that Oomph add-in to Internet Explorer. It will install the Windows Live Writer plugin, or you can download the source code just directly as a zip file, or you can become a contributor to the project and just hook right in through TFS. This was our first project. We're going to be doing more projects. We've got lots of ideas, and we'd love to talk with you about what you think is interesting and what you would like to do as well. So keep an eye on visitmix.com, and we'll be at the Mix conference, of course, in Las Vegas in March. So maybe we'll see you there as well. All right, thanks. And yeah, we'll take some questions now. So, sure. Right. Yes. So the question, just to repeat, is there a problem with false positives so that if somebody happens to already be using the class name, whatever, vCard's probably less likely. Street address is probably more likely where than does somebody discover a microformat that isn't a microformat. In my experience, that this hasn't been a huge problem, but you do point out that one of the things that's interesting about microformats, it's just kind of loose. The whole thing's kind of loose, and it's not a real official spec, but that's sort of in the spirit of microformats. So it's, we had a few situations. I think, Tim, you might remember a few of them where we were running into other people's CSS occasionally, and yeah. Yeah.
So this just appears to be basically modular HTML from what I can see, which has been around for a while, right? And so is the problem here with microformats agreeing on schema for particular microformats, or do you know what I mean? Because really, like you said, it's loose, right? You could come up with n number of microformats, but they're not really useful unless everybody agrees on the format and knows about it.
Right. Exactly. And so his question, just to repeat to the audience, is how interesting is this if this idea has been around for a while, so what makes this interesting opposed to other things? And I think the thing that's interesting is exactly what you suggested, is that it isn't interesting unless people start adopting them. But people are starting to adopt them. You now have, like I said, 1 billion. In fact, if we go here, let me show you how I got that stat. If I go to, hello mouse. If I go back to that Yahoo page and don't search for Karsten Januszewski, but I just search for all instances of H-cards on the web, it's returning 1,490,000 H-cards. So H-card is getting adoption. And if I do H-calendar, it's not as many, but it's a lot. So yeah, it's there's nothing rocket science about microformats. There's nothing controversial about microformats, but these particular schemas are getting popularity, and the microformats.org site, I think, is getting more and more credibility with the community. And so that's the very reason why we wanted to do a project with them and with microformats, was to kind of help this move, to spur this movement on even more. No, not. I mean, there's no plans that I know of. It's like I said, it's basically a bunch of guys. You know, you can go up to microformat.org. They've got a mailing list. It's actually a really, really nice community. I like the guys in this a lot. So, but no, and which may not be a bad thing necessarily. You know, they're not part of the W3C. They're kind of just doing their own thing, and it's working. Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, have you heard anything from like the semantic web guys and what they think about this? And then kind of alluded to at the beginning that semantic web hasn't taken off, but the big goal there is that computers consume information, and that certainly would be possible here. But the cool things we're seeing are things that we consume. So we're consuming information that we relate to Shakespeare. So is there any thought into microformat that they're going to do anything for computer consumption?
Yeah. I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. Just to repeat the question for posterity's sake, is what do the semantic web guys think of microformats, and what are even more scenarios that we can do with these things? I know one of the guys that I've worked with in the community is an RDF guy himself. So I think there's some overlap where those guys see kind of the same idea. But I don't know. I mean, there's the RDF working group in the W3C, and they're still doing their thing and holding to it. So I'm not sure how to answer your other question about what more can we do. Can you clarify?
The search engines and stuff that I guess could peer in and find these key terms and things like that. And read the data. So that, I guess, semantic web, things like agents and all that. Deliver value to us.
Mm-hmm.
Their own inference and things like that. So I guess is the goal here that other than just us reading microformat and displaying data, could we imagine people imagining that crawlers and agents that are
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
there
go, Tom.
actually is some people who are thinking about that. So, for example, there is an H review format, and what folks are thinking about is, what if I wanted to see what people thought about X? I'll use Y as an example. So what they can do is they can sort of scour the internet and sort of say, okay, these are how people are thinking about this, who are thinking about this particular bottle of wine, and then what they can do is they can start extracting out a lot more kind of relevance from that. The search engines are sort of the easy ones to kind of take this because they're always trying to figure out how do we figure out what something is on a page when it's just basically HTML. Longer term, I think you will see people who will start building out and consuming these things, like you said, these agents that will sort of go out to the world and look around. So you can see, like, unfortunately, we did the H audio format. But what's kind of nice about that is the fact that we can say, this is music. Here are some details about that music. Because we suffered through this when we first all started getting music online, in that we all said, well, I've got this great MP3, but I have no idea, like, what's the title, what's the composer, and things like that. So I think longer term, they'll get to it. What the challenge is right now is it's the chicken and egg approach. You have to have people who are creating them, which the Yahoo numbers sort of show that people are creating them. But what we found was that there wasn't a lot of people consuming them, because what people could do is go, well, this stuff's marked up, but what does that mean to me? Now, because you can take that information and put it out, you'll see a lot more consumption. So that was sort of our goal, was to make sure that we hit both the creative and the consumption style. And I think that will create momentum for this to go further into those scenarios you're talking about.
Here is the H audio thing, by the way. I don't know why it wasn't working before. So we just added an additional pane, grabbed that audio information and then rendered it in the Oomph experience. But the thing I was also going to say, have you heard of Metacritic? You know that site that like aggregates all the movie reviews? So you can imagine somebody doing Metacritic. Yeah.
So are you guys also looking at like making this more and more of a no-brainer from a developer's perspective, like building Tang libraries in ASP.NET or extending the existing libraries
Yeah.
to make it easy to emit the microformat?
Right. We didn't really get that far other than the blog engine stuff. But yeah, there's work that could be done there for sure. Yeah.
Well,
Oh, go front row first, sure. Yeah.
I'm thinking, I'm on an intranet. It's my main target. So I'm thinking, is there a story here for taking Oomph extensibility, things like maybe our own or existing formats, and being the chicken and the egg for ourselves, and pushing them out into our SharePoint and into our intranet, and then reconsuming them in search indexes, things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like there's some sort of very like easy self-describing kind of like semantic, of course, semantic web. Does that have a good story, as they say, for intranets as well?
I would think so, yeah.
Never heard anything of anything.
Yeah, but I mean, do we do anything with microformats inside Microsoft Intranet? I don't think we do.
There's some groups who have sort of kind of rallied around this, and they think about it, but I haven't seen anything, especially where we're at, where people are thinking about that. Now, what's interesting is if you go to the wiki that they have, you see a lot of people who are starting to think around those things. So, like a table of contents. We all have sort of a nav that is sort of a manifestation of a table of contents, but now we actually have a microformat that explains how to do that. What they're hoping is that we will create many of these microformats to describe things that are on the web. I could easily see that internally we would have pretty much the same thing, and then you would have, for example, as we move further along, let's say you're using SharePoint. SharePoint would be enabled so that if you said, oh, this is a contact, that SharePoint would say, oh, okay, I know that these are all the different types of contacts that are around.
There is something in there, I assume.
There's not anything today, but like I said, as this grows, our team sort of looks at what I call emerging scenarios. So we try to see stuff that's sort of on the rise. And this was one of those things where we see that it continues to grow in momentum. So as we're going out saying, hey, these microformats is a good thing, and as the standard web folks are saying this is a good thing, we're hoping that it creates even more adoption for it.
Did you have something?
Yeah. I noticed that you put it in the top left corner there. Is it possible with your plugin style to get that moved? Like on a page instance, especially like in Firefox, if you had an RSS right over the left of the green arrow, go arrow, and it's a little orange. Sign. Would it be possible to move that microformat and have it be something more like that RSS that lets you move with additional information, but it doesn't go onto the page where I'd be like, visit my favorite website, and then 2 days later they go green. I have no idea what it is.
Yeah. So there's two aspects to Oomph, consume Oomph. One is the user plugin, and then one is the script. So if you install the IE add-in, then that is always going to put it in the upper left corner. So you don't have control over it. We haven't enabled users to configure the add-in. But if you are adding that Oomph JavaScript to your own site, then you have the option to change the CSS of that. And rather than pulling from our CSS file, you could change the CSS. And basically, you could rip apart the whole JavaScript file and do with it what you will, or the CSS file. And we document and explain how to do that in the Oomph documentation. So, yeah.
First, just a comment. It's interesting to see that, this is the semantic way. I don't know how much it's going back out.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, then secondly, something specific. What is it?
Yeah. I know, and it's so confusing. So vCard is this thing that's been around for a while, for 10 years, and it's just a text. It's actually semicolon delimited way to specify a contact, and they call it a vCard, and it's a script. I mean, it's a spec up on ECMA, I think. So it's been around forever, and you'll notice, like if you go to Outlook, you can export a contact as a vCard, or if you get a vCard from someone, you can import a contact. So this thing's been around forever, and so then the Microformats guys came up with this thing called HCard. I don't know why. I think it's on their wiki why they call it H. You guys remember why? I can't remember. But they chose HCard, so you could really think of it as a different spec than the vCard. But they use all the same naming conventions and everything else. So does that kind of clarify it? Yeah. Not really. But then they make it confusing because the class name you use for an HCard is vCard. So it's just like, but yeah. It's typical standards body confusion stuff. Yeah, in the back.
Kind of a side question, but you mentioned you were doing kind of a postspec to generate the vCard from the HCard. Do you have to then post back to the original server, or did you manage to find some way of posting to your own server to generate it? Because normally you can only issue postbacks to the server which you downloaded.
So the way it works is, so if you click this, that's going to send a query to the VisitMix server just over an HTTP GET, like with query strings, and then the server is going to generate a file, but it's going to give it a MIME type of card vCard, and is going to just immediately send it back to the browser. But it doesn't send back a page; it just sends back the MIME type of vCard, which is why then the browser says, "Oh, what do you want to do with this thing?" Which is why we never load the page, we never instantiate a new page. No, it's almost just like so if I click this one here, so that's going to open a new browser window, right? So it's just like it's an href. Yeah, so all it is an href. No, yeah, and that burnt me because at first I tried to all do it inline and do it behind the scenes, yeah, and I couldn't do that. But that's why it's just a raw href. Yep. And that source code's also in the project if you want to see how we generate the vCards on the server. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it does have, I'm pretty sure, I haven't played a ton with this. I believe it has this thing here where you say, well, what mode is it rendering in? Like, is it rendering in IE7 or is it in Quirks mode, which is really IE6? So you can see what your page will look like. You can emulate. Yeah, so other than that, no, I don't have a great answer for you. But maybe someone else does. Does anyone in the audience have a great answer for that?
The DOM that you were traversing and the events that you responded to in the C++, I just noticed happens to correspond to the events that you can get out of either the ActiveX control that you can get from MSHTML calling it forward, or the one that's also backed, which is exactly the same one, but is fronted by the .NET 2.0 web browser control. So you can get events and manage code that way, or I mean, you could basically just have your own browser hosted, and you can bring up a command window, and you could issue jQuery, like from a WinForms app, right into the render engine of IE6, or I believe, or definitely 7. Definitely. It would be a pretty simple path for something.
Cool.
There is,
Gotcha.
I've started doing something like that. I did like a HTML scanner so that I can mouse over, get get tags, any tags from the place that you're at. And there are a couple of quick capture test tools that do it. Block
Okay, thanks. I have one more question back here, and then we'll wrap it up.
All the stuff that you're harvesting, which was consumed micro is all in Java.
Well, everything we're harvesting is in the HTML.
Right, but I mean your code you're doing is in JavaScript. So that's totally fine. So my question is, if I'm in Silverlight and I want to read the microformat on the page, let's say, would it be a good way to do it? Turn on the JavaScript or is there a better way?
Oh, well, it's funny you mentioned that. We actually, our first prototype we did of Oomph was in Silverlight and wasn't in JavaScript. And it was super easy. You don't have to go to JavaScript because you can get at the DOM right from Silverlight. So you can walk the DOM from Silverlight directly. And so you just get the tree. Actually, we wrote this really slick link query in our initial prototype to find all the H cards on a page in .NET. So you can totally do that. Yeah, you can party on microformats from Silverlight really easily. We just chose not to go with Silverlight because we wanted to do something with jQuery and yeah. You can pull the DOM from Silverlight. So you can see the whole DOM from Silverlight. And then you just ran a link query. Here, afterward, I'll show you a code sample. Yeah, okay. Alrighty, thanks guys.